Let's flash back to the mid-2000s. Disney's sister division, Disney Toon Studios, had spent a decade at this point producing straight-to-video sequels based on hit Disney animated features like Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and even The Little Mermaid, with some slightly more original films like DuckTales the Movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp, and a Goofy movie. The reception of these films was all over the place, with some being panned tremendously, to others becoming beloved classics. But around 2005, they wanted to try something new. The idea was to collaborate with Disney Consumer Products in an attempt to create new franchises based on already existing characters, and create films and merchandise based on them. It was decided that Tinker Bell, one of Disney's most beloved characters and Peter Pan's most trusted ally, would be the first to receive this treatment. By taking an already established character, giving her a voice for the first time, and putting her in a new world with new friends, the possibilities were endless. Plus, they could sell a lot of toys. That's always a plus. With 3 films planned for this new fairy franchise, everything was a go. But what about the boys market? Sure, girls would flock to Tinker Bell and her fairy friends, but there wasn't much here to keep the interest of the typical 6 to 11-year-old boy. There was, however, another Disney film that featured characters that boys would like and take an interest in. Characters that seemed primed to be plucked right into the middle of a high fantasy adventure epic. The characters in question? Snow White's 7 Dwarfs. Just like the already in production Tinker Bell franchise, Disney Toon Studios wanted to take the 7 Dwarfs and spin them off into their own franchise, with movies, toys, and even an RPG video game that was being developed by Obsidian. The film and the proposed game were being worked on at the same time, with decent progress being made on each project. However, the pieces just weren't coming together to Disney's liking. The movie was desperately in need of a director who could keep everything in line and help deliver a worthy successor to Walt's first movie. Enter Mike Disa. Speaking with the website Animated Views in 2013, the writer and director revealed a great deal of what we currently know about this 7 Dwarfs prequel, and also why it never happened. After just recently making his directorial debut of the short film The Origin of Stitch, which was released as a bonus feature on the Lilo & Stitch 2 DVD, word spread throughout the studio about how great the short was, with many seeing Disa ready to tackle a full-on feature film. Mike Disa was approached by Disney Toon president Sharon Morrell, where she asked him to pitch his idea for a 7 Dwarfs movie. Disa's idea was simple: a Lord of the Rings style adventure film that would explore 10,000 years worth of dwarf history as well as their culture. Disa met with one of the top writers at Disney Toon at the time, Evan Spiliotopoulos, to refine and develop the pitch. Getting the chance to direct the 7 Dwarfs feature would be a challenge for them, as they both aimed to go against the typical formula of a Disney Toon movie. And by that point in its life, Disney Toon Studios was well known, for better or for worse, for its standard paint-by-numbers sequel fare, with films like The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2 being especially hated amongst hardcore Disney fans. Although they were certain that Disney Toon wouldn't even think about straying from their tried-and-true formula, Disa and Spiliotopoulos wanted to try anyway. If they could take that standard bare-bones template and do something fresh with it, they'd have a movie. In his interview with Animated Views, Disa said the following about the initial idea. "We came up with this idea to turn the idea of a Disney sequel on its ear. We thought, there are good stories worth telling here, but just doing the same bland white bread rehash of the original story didn't satisfy us artistically. So, because neither of us were particularly worried about finding a job, we decided to try something really, really different." With ideas forming in their heads, Disa and Spiliotopoulos knew that this film needed to seamlessly connect back to the original 1937 classic when all was said and done. So they wrote out some questions about the original film that they wanted this prequel to answer in a satisfying way. Why do the dwarves live alone in the woods? Why do they seem to know the witch? Why is the witch afraid to confront the dwarves? And perhaps most importantly, who is that skeleton in the dungeon, reaching for water? Still wary that the studio wouldn't go for what they had planned, the pair planned a first act that was similar to the films that had come before they would then surprise audiences with unexpected plot points. To quote Disa, We came up with a story that, on the surface, looked like we were telling the origin of the dwarves and how they met, but it was all a trick. As for the story itself, the plot goes as follows. The Seven Dwarfs was going to start with our heroes, Grumpy and Dopey, living in a village home to dwarves, and via a series of incidents that would later be revealed to be intentional, Dopey and Grumpy are forced to go on a journey into what is known as the Old Lands. Throughout their travels, they meet the other dwarves, with each one joining the quest for their own reasons. Being hunted by an evil wizard, the dwarves are assisted by a beautiful young lady named Narcissa, whom they will eventually grow to love and care for, just like they will Snow White one day. However, Narcissa gradually shows signs of a dark side. Disney princesses usually make all the right decisions. By contrast, Narcissa makes all the wrong decisions. Still, the dwarves believe that she has a good heart, as their adventures lead them to the ancient city of Dwarfenholm. But in a third act twist, the dwarves discover the wizard is actually Narcissa's father. He and Narcissa have been using the dwarves to access the Olden Dwarfs' ancient magical power. Narcissa ends up betraying her father, leading to him becoming enslaved inside the magic mirror. With the Olden Dwarfs' magic, she then turns on her 7 companions. Dopey heroically sacrifices himself to rescue his new band of friends, but the dwarves, with Grumpy at the forefront, are able to save Dopey and escape, immune to Narcissa's magic. Nonetheless, Narcissa takes the throne from Snow White's father, who would later be seen in Snow White as a skeleton in the dungeon, and begins her reign as the evil queen, with her father forever trapped as her slave in the mirror. Thus, the dwarves must live in hiding to protect their families from the queen's vengeance, which is where we find them in the original film. According to Mike Disa, the idea was to add all these layers and complexities to the world so we could tell stories in it, but also be absolutely respectful to the source material. In no way did we want to do anything that could cause any kind of harm to the experience of watching Snow White. The main reason I wanted to do the film was to protect Snow White from some of the less respectful treatments of original material we had seen. Evan and I loved Snow White, and if there had to be a sequel, we wanted it to be worthy. Not wanting to copy or imitate what had come before, but still remain true to the source material, it was opted to not make Dwarfs a traditional Disney musical. Soon after hammering down their pitch, Disa and Spiliotopoulos had a meeting with Sharon Morell and other staff at the studio. The response they got was amazing, being incredibly positive. People were crying and gasping in the room, recalls Disa. Morell agreed to the pitch and gave the two free rein to do whatever they liked. What happens next is where things kinda started to unravel. As the months went on, the executives would begin to offer suggestions of their own. What if we set dwarves after Snow White? For instance, what if dwarves were to take place 1,000 years after Snow White? Well, that would be a great idea, but that would also be a different movie, wouldn't it? That would be a sequel. This is a prequel. What if the original 7 dwarfs weren't in it? What if we introduced all new characters? That's a great idea, and that's also another movie. You should write that down and start the process of making that movie. But we need you to focus on this movie for a minute and say whether or not you think it's working so we can move it into production. Despite some pushback from executives who clearly didn't understand what he was trying to accomplish, Disa had great success in moving Dwarfs forward, with the script making its way around the studio to great reception. People were sneaking copies of it to read because they thought it was so good, says Disa. Disa's co-workers even told him that it was good enough to pitch at the main studio for a possible full-on theatrical film. However, Disa and his crew much preferred the independent, lower-budget route that Disney Toon Studios offered. The point of Disney Toon was to keep projects as far away from the out-of-control spending at Disney Feature Animation as possible, says Disa, so you could let a director and a writer come up with an idea and execute it with very little risk. I never would have expected Disney Feature Animation to make the Dwarfs film Evan and I wanted to make, because I think it was a little too risky for a general audience. Even still, Disney seemed fairly confident in the Dwarfs project as they went ahead and started planning 3 sequels. These would have taken place after the events of the original Snow White, and followed the dwarves' return home to their families and friends after the defeat of the evil queen. But as is common with a lot of movies that never end up happening, a shakeup at the studio was about to cause the plans for Dwarfs to get interrupted. In January 2006, Disney purchased Pixar for $7.4 billion. Pixar's creative director at the time, John Lasseter, took on a new position as the Chief Creative Officer of Disney Feature Animation, which he renamed Walt Disney Animation Studios. Lasseter had made no secret in the past of his dislike of the direct-to-video sequels that Disney had been putting out. But when it came to Dwarfs, Lasseter and his people apparently really liked it. Believe it or not, we were told the new regime liked it a great deal. They loved the film and our approach to it, says Disa. Sadly, the fun and excitement of the project was all about to come crashing down on Disa. He received a phone call one day from one of the development executives. The executive had called with a note for the film. The note?
Make Dopey talk.
Disa didn't know what to say. What?
We need to make Dopey talk,
insisted the executive as he went on to tell Disa that they believed a silent protagonist would not help sell the film, despite the fact that Wall-E would prove this wrong a year later. Granted, the studio had recently given Tinkerbell a voice for the first time ever, but that made sense. People couldn't hear fairies, so the fact that Tink could actually talk wasn't a huge surprise. But Dopey? Disa informed the executive that audiences had no trouble falling in love with Dopey before. However, the executives wanted Dopey to be the main character here.
We think we need to make the story about Dopey. We'll keep your story, but we want the movie to be mainly about how Dopey lost the ability to talk.
How Dopey lost the ability to talk? You mean he's been wounded?
Well, maybe not physically, maybe just emotionally.
But Walt said that Dopey could talk, he just didn't.
We think that's an old-fashioned idea, so we want to tell the story of how Dopey had an emotional trauma that keeps him from talking.
Are you saying you want me to come up with some way that, at the end of the film, Dopey gets scarred emotionally and doesn't talk?
No. We should do it at the beginning, like maybe Dopey should watch his mother die or something.
Expectedly, Disa was absolutely horrified about what he was being told. Not only was the studio giving one of Disney's happiest carefree characters a tragic backstory, but the standard dead parents one at that. According to Disa, the executive was adamant that Dwarfs should be a light comedy where the comic lead is traumatized into becoming a mute by watching his mother die in the first act, and then goes on an unrelated carefree adventure with his friends. Soon enough, a meeting was held to discuss the direction the movie should take. The meeting was attended by Disa and several executives of the company. It was unanimous among the execs that giving Dopey a tragic backstory was the way to go, with them also believing that Disa's original pitch for the project was too dark. They insisted that they wanted a fun family comedy, with Disa reportedly being told by one executive, "Introduce the comedy and then slip in the mother thing. Kids won't notice." The executives then waited for a response from Disa. If they were going to pitch this new version of the film to John Lasseter, then quick decisions needed to be made. So, what do you think? You're out of your f***ing mind! I am not walking into John Lasseter's office and pitching him the Dopey's Too Emotionally Scarred to Talk movie. According to Disa, the executives had a simple response. You should go think about it for a while. We'll come up with some treatments. You can come up with whatever you want. I'm not doing that. As the days went on and days turned into weeks, more meetings were held about the new direction. Disa had a huge decision to make. Could he just walk away from this project that he had spent so much time and effort on? A project that he himself was very passionate about? After a year of work, everything from the screenplay to the storyboards to the test reels, it was all going to be thrown out for another by-the-numbers Disney prequel that he simply didn't believe in. Disa tried one more time to change the minds of the executives, as he knew this was all a huge mistake. Are you sure I can't talk you out of this? However, the executives felt very strongly about the new direction. Then I'm going to wish you guys luck with this, because I'm not doing it. You have to do what we tell you to do. You're a director for us. You work here. Yeah, but I don't want to make this crap. So I quit. After this, Disa quietly stepped away from the project. He could have gone to John Lasseter with the issue, however, he wanted to remain professional, and that meant not causing a scene or getting any higher-ups involved. Disa said of the experience, "The deal in Hollywood is clear. You present a vision for a film. The execs at one company or another hire you to make that vision. The process of executing that vision is collaborative, and the project usually improves from input and critique. But when a studio changes their mind and doesn't want that story anymore, Then a professional puts away his ego, carefully considers the new direction, and looks in himself to see if he has any real passion for the new idea. If not, then the director should gracefully excuse himself with as little drama as possible and move on to a project that he can get excited about. Films need directors who are passionate about the material, not just collecting a check. There's a name for someone who would do whatever he is asked for money. It is an artist. A month later, Disa left Disney Toon, after giving them a month's notice that he would be leaving. He had offered to help the new Dwarfs director by informing them about the recent work that had been made on the project to ensure a seamless transition. But in a twist of fate, the new director was the exact executive who originally suggested that Dopey talk, and being offended that Disa was leaving, declined the offer. Even so, Disa had no hard feelings towards the studio, which he expressed on his final day. With love, I told them I really hope the film goes well. There were a lot of really talented people working on it. I'm sorry, but I creatively think this is a bad idea. But I hope I'm wrong. For a solid month after Disa departed, the team pressed on with the project. They then pitched the film's new storyline to John Lasseter. He canceled the project immediately. The new direction never stood a chance against what Disa had planned. Not much has surfaced from the project over the years, but what we do have is a storyboard of the scene where Grumpy and Dopey first meet, as well as part of the trailer for the film, both of which were uploaded to Vimeo by Disa. I'll leave links to these in the description below. In the years following the cancellation of Dwarves, Disa found work at other studios, from directing Hoodwink 2 Hood vs. Evil for the Weinstein Company, to directing Postman Pat the movie, an adaptation of the beloved UK children's series. His most recent work includes writing credits on the 2017 Wacky Races reboot, as well as directing and co-writing the 2021 film Dolphin Island. He currently works as a scene planner for The Simpsons. As for Disney Toon Studios, they puttered on for several years after the cancellation of Dwarves. Tinkerbell would finally be released in late 2008 to great success and would spawn tons of merchandise, with Tinkerbell's fairy friends even making appearances at the Disney parks, with a whole Pixie Hollow area being planned for Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom, though this would later be scrapped in favor of Storybook Circus. The film itself would go on to spawn 5 sequels, those being Tinkerbell and the Lost Treasure, Tinkerbell and the Great Fairy Rescue, Secret of the Wings, The Pirate Fairy, and the series would end with Tinkerbell and the Legend of the Neverbeast in 2015. Disney Toon Studios would finally close its doors on June 28, 2018, with its final film, a third installment in the Planes franchise, being cancelled as a result, which would make Legend of the Neverbeast their final released film. From a business perspective, Disney Toon made sense. Making movies, especially feature theatrical films, cost a lot of money, but by cutting a few costs and hiring aspiring animators and writers, double the amount of films could be made. In the 90s, this made sense as a way to double productivity and also double income. But with the results often not being far from satisfactory, Disney Toon usually didn't provide a good look for the Disney company as a whole. And with Disney now owning Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm properties like Star Wars or Indiana Jones, the idea of cheaply producing sequels or spin-offs to popular franchises isn't really needed these days. Disney Toon Studios had a purpose, and for the time it was around, it served that purpose. And I know that I and many others possess memories of growing up on these direct-to-video sequels, prequels, and requels. But perhaps a little more care could have been taken with some of those films. Hey everyone, Seeker here. I hope you all enjoyed the video. And if you like what you saw, be sure to comment and subscribe. Until next time guys, take care.